Well, welcome. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being here. My name is Ross, and I have the privilege of hosting a lot of these conversations for Good Shepherd. And I am joined by Pastor Pamela Palmer. Pastor Pamela, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Now, you serve as our congregational care executive pastor, and I have a lot of things that I want to talk to you about today that are happening in the life of our church. But before we jump in, can you tell folks a little bit about your ministry and some of the day-to-day and what you oversee?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a huge question, but when I think about what I do here, it's just really precious, sacred work. I'm going to
Sure.
start there because I absolutely love this church. I love our congregation. Anytime I'm here, whether it's a Sunday morning or throughout the week when I'm meeting with folks, there's just such an explosion of joy in my heart when I get to see those familiar faces, those people I serve alongside with, the friends I have here. And so I think I get to do some of the most precious and beautiful ministry work here at Good Shepherd. I might be a little bit biased when I say that, but I
Sure.
love being able to care for our congregation. And so kind of the broadest way for me to talk about what I do is I say I oversee most, not all, because I know that care and support is happening in every single ministry here. But I say I do most of the work around caring for and supporting our congregation. And so that is anything from making hospital or home visits to praying with people and following up on every single prayer request we get here at the church, to facilitating our grief groups during the week or training our care ministers to make sure that they're able to go out and serve and do what God has called them to do.
Yeah, that's well said. For my wife Lauren and I, it was one of the first things that stood out to us about this place. The idea that you um, are given quite literally resources, you're given structure, you lead a team of volunteer care ministers. We are able to lean into a conversation and hard conversations that so many churches want to lean into and maybe don't know how. Or honestly, a lot of churches are kind of actively leaning away from. And I love that you are able to meet people where they're at, lean into some of that sacred work, like you said, and support people in wherever their walks are. You know, I know you mentioned grief share, and I want to talk about that in a sec, but I know, you also provide a level of support to our divorce care groups. And that's a critical, crucial work that we do here. Obviously, the most important thing we do as a church, you oversee our prayer team. And there's just incredible, the fact that we are able to have that as a built into our DNA, I think is one of the foundational differences in Good Shepherd.
And
But
that's one of the
yeah,
things that makes our church so unique, as you're saying. Like, I love hearing that when you and your wife, Lauren, started at Good Shepherd, that was something you guys saw immediately, because caring for each other is absolutely vital to what we do as a church. And, we are out there serving all around the community, all around the world. And those efforts and missions are absolutely incredible as we go out and share the gospel. And there is something too, though, to caring for one another. We hear in Galatians talking about carrying one another's burdens. Like, there is something to this church family where we're here for each other. Life is going to happen. Things are going to come up, whether it's the things you want to celebrate. And, we have people who send in their praise reports. And I love that too, because I'm like, this is great. Like, you're
yeah,
celebrating X amount of years of marriage, or you just welcomed a new baby or grandbaby into your family. Or a lot of times people will send me the follow-up, hey, you guys have been praying for this for a couple months. Guess what? Here's how it turned out. And we are just giving thanks to God. And so these are things that are just so crucial to the life of a church. Like, we really love our people. We love this church family. And to care for one another is such a huge part of what it means to be the church.
yeah. And what I hope people hear in that too, I think there's probably this idealism that happens where it's like, man, do we really need this kind of almost structure to what you're describing? And the answer is yes. The answer is, as much as we could talk about, yes, we need to have, we could all just sit here and pray for each other. Having a system associated with that is what it fuels discipleship. It's what makes it fuels the spiritual momentum of this place is probably a better way of saying that. And you had
It
mentioned
does.
grief, and you mentioned grief share earlier, and I want to lean into that next because for people who maybe that's a new term for them, just to back off a little bit, because you and we're already jumping in really fast. What is grief share, and what should people know about this as a sort of a ministry?
Yeah, so Grief Share started in fall of 2020 here at Good Shepherd, but Grief Share is a national ministry that partners with churches to bring grief support to churches and the local community. And so I started here at Good Shepherd in March of 2020 when things were shutting down and
It's
people
a busy
were,
time.
yeah, crazy time. And one of the things I noticed right away was grief happens for our congregation, right? And I was getting almost weekly notifications. I lost this person, I lost that person. And we had some things already in place as a church to support folks who were grieving, which was awesome. Like I stepped into a place that was already taking steps to care for each other and to be there for those who were grieving. But the idea of having something a little bit more structured and routine just rose up really quickly in my heart. And I was at the time thinking, Lord, how am I supposed to start anything new during COVID? Like,
Right.
people aren't getting together. People are barely hanging in there. Like, week to
Right.
week, everything was changing. And so I was like, I need to find leaders and I need to figure out how to create a meaningful space online to accomplish this. And so thankfully, Grief Share, they had things ready to go for online and made it really easy for churches to pivot and shift. So that was a godsend that we partnered with an organization that knows their stuff and they are like a well-oiled machine. And immediately I had 5 people here at Good Shepherd respond to the call to serve and to facilitate. And it was beyond my expectations. I thought we were going to be like a skeleton crew trying to get this ministry going. But we had 5 people sign up. We had participants registering right away, and we were able to just launch. And so we did our first couple sessions in the fall and the spring, all online. And then we eventually got to move to in person, and it just grew exponentially from there. And so we're going into like our 4th year of doing Grief Share here at Good Shepherd. And this year we are expanding. We are doing summer groups, and we are offering a Coping with the Holidays seminar that's going to be coming up around the holiday season. I haven't gotten that date set yet, but we're ready to expand, and
Yeah.
our team is excited. I think there's definitely some room for our team to grow.
Yeah.
We have this we have these plans for expanding in place. And so that means we need more leaders. And here's what I strongly believe. God is laying this on our hearts to expand our grief ministry. And I know that when he is calling us to do something, he will absolutely provide. And so I always encourage people, keep your heart and eyes and your ears open for when God is just giving you that nudge saying, that's for you. Like, you have what it takes to do that. Even if you may not think it, you have that. And so I'm excited to have more people joining our team so that we can keep expanding. Grief is such a hard thing in our culture. And so as a church, if we can walk with people through those seasons, I feel like it's an incredible opportunity to minister.
Yeah. I hope people pay attention to the sort of counterintuitive nature of what you're describing, right? Because what we're leaning into is this idea of it goes back to where we started. You and your team feel this impressing of the Holy Spirit of this is something that's being expected of now, and you use the word excited. Obviously, we would love to live in a world where that grief share doesn't exist. However, because we live on this side of Revelation, this is something that your team is responding to. And what I hope people hear in that is that that y'all are ready to receive them, especially for something as complicated and nuanced. And I'll use the phrase individualized as grief. It requires this level of space that you guys are creating.
Yeah.
You brought up the fact that you're leaning into new groups that you're meeting over the summer as well. before we dive into some of that more specifically, as you've walked with these folks for now 4 years or so, I'm curious how you've seen the conversation change, and what are some of those things that have come up each and every session? What are some of those things about creating this space for people to walk together that are always rising to the surface?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to see people go through our program, and we meet them week one. And for most people, this grief program is the first time that they're with other people who understand grief.
Right.
They're with other people who will listen, and they're in a place that's actually compassionate. Um, it's unfortunate that most of the people around us are ready to move on very quickly when you lose a close loved one. And everyone else just sort of after a couple weeks, they're like, okay, I'm fine again. Or people going back to work after a loss, and like they don't have coworkers that want to be around them or talk with them anymore because everyone's like, this is awkward. I don't know what to say to them. I don't know
Right.
how to help them. And so when we meet these folks on the first week they come, it is often just an unloading of all of their sorrow and heartaches, and there's just so much story being told, and people are letting us in. It's really incredible how vulnerable people can be right from the start because they're finally in a space where they can be. And then they go through this program of 13 weeks. Many of them have come multiple sessions, and so they're
Right.
with us for a year, and we see movement. Now they don't magically, they're not magically okay. Like, okay, I'm
Grief
done
isn't
grieving. I don't,
linear. Yeah,
right.
grief isn't linear.
Nobody's
It's not.
ever
Yeah, yeah,
done
yeah.
grieving. You're
Right.
always going to feel the loss of the person you loved, right? But we see them coming to places like, I now understand that I'm not going crazy. That's what I've
Yeah.
learned here. I've made meaningful connections with other participants who have had similar losses, and we're friends now. And I've got some newness going on in my life. I see them saying, I'm closer to Jesus now because I went through these weeks. And that one for me is just always like, that gets my heart just pumping. And I'm like, this
Yeah.
is amazing, God, because no matter how we're ministering to people, we get to show them the love of Christ. And
Yeah.
we've had people walk away saying, I know how to manage my grief now. I know how to take some steps forward. I know what I might want to do with my life now as I'm discovering this new normal. And so it's really incredible to see just the leaps and bounds of progress people make. Yeah, they're still crying every day, every week. They feel the emotion. Things come up around your loss, but they're healing, and they're finding more hope, and they're finding their way to Jesus in the midst of one of the most hardest seasons in their life. And so it's just incredible space to be part of. I use the word sacred space a lot when I talk about what I do, because you really do, when you enter into these toughest moments in people's lives, it feels so like you're on sacred ground with these folks, and it is all heart and soul and emotions and spirituality and all of that just at play.
Yeah. That's beautiful. It reminds me that this is the work that the church exists for, especially in a time where less and less spaces can exist for this, where there are less and less spaces where we can sit across from each other, and have a conversation. Nuance is going away,
Yeah.
more and more. The ability to um, give each other time. And you said earlier too, the idea of being in a space where you just know that the person understands, like that right there is such a blessing despite the grief. You had
Yeah.
talked about this before, and I want to make sure people understand. You mentioned there was, I think you said six. Forgive me if I'm misremembering from earlier in the conversation. Initially, who stepped up to be leaders,
Right.
um, and I'm thinking about there's folks who are listening to this, folks who are watching this, who are going, man, I've been through that, and grief isn't linear. I'm still grieving, but I'm in a place where I can provide a sense of purpose to this by leaning into this conversation, and others who are perhaps going through, maybe this is a new conversation for them. Um, if someone is feeling, I'm putting words to it, but if someone's feeling that kind of conviction,
Mhm.
what are what are the people that you're looking for to lead these kinds of small groups?
That's definitely the question we start with. I ask, have you lost someone and feel like you found your way through? You found your ability to take some steps forward. You are in a place where you feel God's healing has touched your heart and your life. And you're kind of wondering, what's next with that? Like, I went through this really tough season, really deep season of grief. And I'm at a place that's different. It doesn't, a lot of times grieving people will say it doesn't feel as raw. And I get
Sure.
that, right? I've lost very close people to me, and I know what that raw loss feeling is. It's just like, it just feels right at the surface and so hard to even want to touch or deal with.
Right.
Um, but in time, there's less raw moments, essentially, where you could still have a pretty raw emotion come up around your grief, even years later, and you're like, man, where did that come from? But I'm looking, for people who are interested in serving on this team and facilitating our groups, it's those folks who feel, yeah, I learned something when I was grieving. I know how helpful it is to have somebody else walk with you or be there for you. I know that this is not something that you want to do alone. And so that's always a starting conversation when people have been interested in serving on this ministry team. I'm like, well, let's start with you. What have you come through? Where have you been with grief? What have you learned? And what's your heart for helping others? And it kind of just starts there with the realization of, yeah, I've grieved, and I know how important it is to have someone there for you.
Right.
And that's the beauty. And when I there's a training, of course, that all of our leaders go through, and Grief Share provides the content for that. It's not a painful training, which is great. It's a good training. Um, but we start there, and often my whole goal as we train and prepare ourselves is, let's create that loving, compassionate, safe space for these people. Like, that's what it's about. We are the church. Like, we are the love of Christ in action. We are his hands and feet. We get to be those arms that are embracing people. And so at the very heart of this ministry as leaders or facilitators, we're just creating a loving, compassionate space for people to come each week to be ministered to and to be supported.
Yeah. I love that. And I hope people here too, you know, there's some cynical responses that I want to address kind of specifically because I want to make sure that there's no misunderstandings. I want to provide some clarity too.
Yep.
You know, when the fact that there's training, the fact that there's conversation, you know, there's people who just naturally have an instinct that they want to help. In any situation, doesn't matter what the situation is, they want to help. That is their heart, their spirits, their first response. And one of the great things about what you do is you can oversee lots of different ways to help. You have meals ministry, you have prayer ministry, you have various care ministry opportunities.
Yep.
Grief share is a very specific thing. And the fact that training exists, the fact that those conversations exist, is purposeful because it is that sacred space. And it's not exclusionary, it's appropriate because we want to make sure that people who are facilitating are able to help continue to create a sense of belonging for those folks. And if I'm someone who's perhaps looking at that, I want to know that that has happened. I want to know that the people who are there are not just the first people who were on the top of your,
Yeah.
volunteer list, right?
Well, I'll say this. So the heart of our church is that people are using their gifts and talents and time in really meaningful, purposeful ways, right? Like, we are not we need a body, let's fill a space kind of church. We're just
Right.
not. And I
Yep.
I love that about our church, because we know that God has made each of us unique. He has equipped each of us with this unique personality and set of gifts and skills and talents and availability and time and resources. And so we want people to fit exactly where God has them for. And I've had people come up to me and meet with me and then get plugged in saying, I love what we're doing with care ministry. I don't quite know where I'm supposed to fit in, but can we meet and have some initial conversations? And I love that because it is fun. It's fun to discern together. and pray together and figure out, oh yeah, I'm hearing about this ministry. I want to do that. I think that's exactly what God is laying on my heart to do. And so we absolutely want that for people. And so the other thing I want to say to respond to what you just said is also like our training is because I already see in people the passion for helping the grieving folks, and they're gifted and skilled. So the training hones that. The
Right.
training gives us the proper way to channel that. Also, a group setting is really unique in that it's now a bunch of people put together that don't know each other, that are brand new in each other's lives. So the training helps us as facilitators be able to tend to that soil and
Yep.
be able to create a good, ripe environment. And what I have heard from our leaders is the training is something that's been super beneficial to them. They're able to put words to some of the things they've experienced in their own grief journeys so that they can just help others more effectively.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that if someone's interested in learning more about serving as a grief share leader, that their next right step is to talk to you, and that, as you just described, that that's what some of that conversation is going to look like? It's going to look like discernment. It's going to look like getting to know each other, and it's
Absolutely.
going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I value people's time. I value people's process and journey. I
Right.
have met with people and, we've had a great conversation. We've had follow-up conversations, and maybe it's a month or two later when they finally feel like, all right, this is the time. But they
Right.
already have an idea then of where they want to plug into. And so I'm sensitive to people's schedules and just making sure like this is where you want to be. This is where you want to serve. And so it's been a great process. I feel like I've had that conversation with so many people across the ministries I oversee.
Yeah.
And I just look over the different, leaders and servers that I have on my teams, and they are just getting to really thrive in the ministry area that they are serving in. And our grief share leaders, they are just such an awesome group of people, and they have been able to take their own experience of grief and channel it somewhere and really help others. And so it's just a really unique opportunity that we get to do here at this church. And our grief ministry has just exploded in so many ways. Like we have grief share, but we also have monthly widow support, monthly widower support. It's just really incredible what God is doing. And so I always want to pay attention to like, God's clearly doing something here, and He is stirring in the way that we can care for grieving folks in our congregation, but also in our local community. All of these grief opportunities are open to those outside of these four walls, so to speak. You don't have to be a
Yeah.
member at Good Shepherd to get grief support. And so it becomes a way that we are really a light to the community, and our leaders get to participate in being that light and being that love of Christ.
Amen. Yeah. And yeah, that's fantastic, because let's say someone is watching this, I'm listening to this, I'm still participating in this conversation, and maybe I don't feel like this is for me. I don't feel like that's something I've walked through. Please be praying. Whether you're part of this church community or not, like, please be praying for the work that Pastor Pamela and our team are doing, because it is crucial work. It is the work of the church, and it is not possible without the power of prayer. I want to clarify something and kind of land the plane here, because there are certain handles, certain words that we wind up kind of assigning to things that wind up meaning different things at different times, different things to different people. So when we talk about grief, when we talk about grief share, there's obviously lots of different ways to define grief. As we've had this conversation, you have used the phrase, lost someone, that if you've lost someone close to you, that seemed to be the center of a lot of the conversations you've had. However, to ask the question in the broadest sense of the word, if I'm been going through this and I feel like I may want to participate in a grief share group, is that okay? Like, who is this grief share groups for?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question and a good thing to clarify on. So, as I mentioned at the start of this, Grief Share is a program that we use. It's something that we partner with. It's a tool for our church. The way Grief Share is set up and structured, it is very much for those who have lost a person. I recognize that there are so many losses in life that we experience, whether it's the loss of a job, estranged relationships, you're going through a season of separation. There's just infinite amounts of losses that we face. Even health issues create so many losses in our life. So Grief Share really is tailored to someone who has lost a person in their life. And I say person because one of the things I didn't mention in that list is some people lose a pet and are
Sure.
completely heartbroken and like
Sure.
it devastates their life. Unfortunately, Grief Share really is just for people who have lost a loved one, lost a person. Um, I even had someone a couple years ago reach out and say, "Hey, my parent has Alzheimer's and I feel like I've lost them. Can I join Grief Share?" The way Grief Share is set up, it did not work well for that person to plug in there. However, I am not a nope, but I'll keep you in my prayers kind of person.
Yeah.
I'm going to pray for you and I'm also going to connect you to the support that you need.
Yep.
Whether our church does it or there are other places within the community, I'm almost always able to plug somebody into the kind of support we have. We have our Hope for Mental Health ministry that can confidentially connect somebody to a local mental health resource, whether you're looking for counseling, diagnosis, or even a way to join the fight and raising awareness around mental health. Our team also can provide trainings around mental health for your workplace, for your neighborhood, for any group. The team is made up of professional counselors and then lay people who just have a heart for mental health. We also have in Naperville, there's a caretaker support group. So the woman I
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
referenced,
Yeah.
I was able to refer her to a local caretaker support group where she was able to connect with people who know what she's going through. We also have our care ministers here at Good Shepherd. Those folks go through a training to provide one-on-one confidential support to someone who is going through any challenging or difficult season in their life. And we have had people connect with a care minister from everything from medical health diagnosis that's really tough to I want to get to know God and God's word better. Can you do a Bible study with me? So our care ministers are really well trained to connect with people in various different seasons of life, from someone who just wants to get to know God's word more as they're going through a tough time, to someone who my health is failing and declining and I just need that listening ear, that prayer partner, that encourager in my life. And we're able to connect with quite a few congregants every year and provide that ongoing care minister support. So there is absolutely always a way to care for our congregation. And that's something that brings me such joy
Yeah.
because I don't want to have to turn someone away. I don't want to have to say we can't help, but we have different ministry areas that can support our people and what they're going through, whether it's right through our own ministries or connecting them with an organization in the community.
Perfect. And that's what a great place to leave it. It requires folks watching, yes, it requires you being vulnerable to take a step. But whatever that looks like for you, we are a place that can help get connected to the kind of care and support that you need. Pastor Pamela, thank you for the time. Thank you, those of you, for watching and listening. And we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks,
Cool.
Ross.